James had always dreamed of exploring space. As a young man from Earth, he had spent years studying galaxies, planets, and the unknown wonders of the universe. Now, standing on the bridge of the Starwind, a massive spaceship, he was about to begin his first real mission. It was a quiet day in the distant corners of space, far from Earth. But this was the beginning of something extraordinary. The mission was simple enough. Deliver supplies to a newly established space station on a remote planet. But as the Starwind sailed through the stars, James couldn't shake the feeling that something incredible was waiting for him out there. He had no idea how true that feeling would be. The station was on a planet known as Zalora, inhabited by a species of aliens James had only heard of in brief reports. They were humanoid, tall and slender, with skin that shimmered like polished silver. Their culture was rich and ancient, their knowledge of the universe beyond anything humanity had ever understood. James had spent weeks studying their history, their rituals, and their language, but nothing could have prepared him for the encounter he was about to have. As the Starwind docked at the station, James made his way to the airlock, eager to meet the inhabitants of Zalora. He had heard stories of their ways mysterious, and at times strange. The station was dark, lit only by the soft glow of alien technology. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the quiet hallways. James could feel the tension in the air as he approached the meeting room inside. Standing tall and graceful was Zara, the alien ambassador from Zalora. She had the appearance of a beautiful and powerful being, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim light. Her long, flowing hair shimmered like strands of liquid silver. James had read about her. Zara was known as one of the most respected figures in her species. She was intelligent, strong, and calm, with a deep understanding of the galaxy. As James stepped forward to greet her, his heart raced. He had met many people before, but this was different. This was an alien, a being from another world, with customs and traditions completely foreign to anything he had known. "Welcome, human," Zara said, her voice smooth and melodic. Her eyes locked onto his, and James could feel a strange warmth radiating from her. "I am honored to meet you." James hesitated for a moment, unsure of the appropriate response. Back home, humans greeted each other with handshakes or hugs. But Zalora had different customs. He had studied their ways. He knew they were a polite species. But he wasn't sure how to greet her. Before he could speak, Zara stepped closer. She didn't seem to notice James' confusion as she moved in. In a moment that seemed to last forever, Zara leaned in, her lips parting. James froze. "W8," he stammered, raising his hand instinctively. But it was too late. Zara's lips brushed against his, and before he could fully comprehend what was happening, she had pressed her mouth against his. The sensation was strange, foreign. Her lips were warm, and as they made contact, James could feel something he hadn't expected, a rush of energy, a strange connection. It wasn't a kiss like anything he had known. It wasn't passionate, and it wasn't meant to be romantic. But it was intense, like an electric shock running through him. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as his body tensed. This wasn't a greeting that he understood. Zara pulled back, her face expressionless. She didn't seem fazed by the act, as though it was nothing out of the ordinary. James, on the other hand, was still standing frozen, his mouth slightly open in shock. His mind was spinning. What had just happened? What kind of greeting was this? It was like nothing he had ever experienced. I didn't," James started, his voice faltering. He didn't even know how to finish the sentence. He was still trying to process the moment. Zara smiled, her silver eyes glinting with amusement. "In my culture, this is how we greet one another. It is a sign of respect, a gesture, to connect deeply with another being." James stood there, completely speechless. He didn't know how to respond. He had read about alien customs, but he had never imagined this. Tongue-kissing as a greeting. It seemed so foreign, so odd, that he wasn't sure what to think. For a moment, there was an awkward silence. James' thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But all he could think about was the warmth of her lips, the strange energy he had felt when their mouths touched. "Are you?" Zara asked, tilting her head slightly. She seemed genuinely concerned, her alien eyes searching his face for any sign of distress. James nodded quickly, trying to pull himself together. "I'm fine," he said, his voice shaky. "I just wasn't expecting that." "I understand," Zara said. "Your species has different customs. But here, it is a sign of goodwill. A way of expressing openness." James took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. His mind was still reeling, but he forced a smile. "I guess I'm not quite used to it," he said, trying to make light of the situation. "But it's definitely different." Zara smiled again, her expression softening. "We will have many opportunities to learn from each other, human. For now, I will show you our ways, and you will show me yours." James nodded, his mind still racing, but now with more curiosity than confusion. The encounter had been unexpected, yes. But it was also the beginning of something much bigger, something he could never have imagined. What had just happened, he still wasn't sure. But one thing was certain. This mission was going to be far more complicated than he had ever anticipated. And Zara, she was no ordinary alien. James spent the next few days in a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. After that shocking first encounter with Zara, everything seemed different. It wasn't just the way the aliens lived. It was the way they thought. The station on Zalora was like nothing he had ever seen. Everything, from the architecture to the customs, so advanced and so foreign to him that he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. Despite his best efforts to understand, there was an invisible wall between him and Zara, between him and the Zelleran people. She was the perfect ambassador, calm and composed, her every movement graceful and measured. But to James, she remained an enigma. Every time they spoke, it felt as if there was something left unsaid. A subtle shift in the air that James couldn't pinpoint. He tried his best to be polite, to fit into their culture, but there was always that nagging doubt at the back of his mind. Was Zara being kind out of genuine interest, or was it just a cultural formality? He couldn't tell. He had no idea how to read her or anyone from this strange world. In their conversations, Zara spoke with warmth, but there was always a calm distance. She would share stories of her people's history, their achievements, their philosophies, about the universe, but nothing about her personal life. Her eyes held a distant, unreadable quality that only added to the mystery. It was a quiet morning when James found himself alone in the station's central garden, staring up at the bioluminescent trees that flickered like stars. His mind wandered back to the kiss the way it had felt. It wasn't just a greeting. There had been something in it that he couldn't explain, something human. He knew it was a custom for Zara's species, a way of connecting on a deeper level. But for James, it had been something much more personal. Maybe I misinterpreted it. James muttered under his breath. Maybe it was just a cultural thing, nothing more. Yet even as he said it, he didn't believe it. His body had reacted to the kiss in a way he couldn't shake, a pull deep within him that felt undeniable. Was it just the alien's warmth? The strange energy? Or something else? He was unsure. What if there was more to it than just custom? What if Zara had seen something in him that he didn't even know was there? He pushed the thought out of his mind, forcing himself to focus on the task ahead. He couldn't let his emotions interfere. This mission was far too important. But despite his best efforts, his mind kept drifting back to Zara, to the soft, quiet way she looked at him with those glowing silver eyes. That afternoon, as the two of them walked along the station's observation deck, Zara turned to James with a smile, her eyes glinting in the soft artificial light. "You seem distracted." "Human," she said, her voice gentle but curious. "Something troubling you?" James hesitated. He could feel her gaze on him, but he couldn't find the words to explain what he was feeling. The kiss, the connection it, was so far beyond anything he had ever known. But could he tell her? Could he admit that he didn't understand the strange pull he felt toward her? "Nothing at all," James replied, his voice faltering slightly. Just a bit of a long journey, I guess." Zara nodded, but there was something in her expression that told James she wasn't convinced. She tilted her head slightly as if she was searching for something in his face, something deeper than words could express. He was certain that she had sensed his confusion, his disquiet, but she didn't press him for answers. Instead, she simply smiled that knowing smile and turned to look out at the distant stars. "There's much to learn here," Zara said softly, her tone now more serious. "Much that can be taught and much that can be shared. But it takes time to understand." James followed her gaze toward the horizon. The space around them felt so vast, and yet in that moment he felt a sense of intimacy with her that he couldn't explain. It wasn't just her calm demeanor, her advanced intelligence, it was something else. It was the connection that still lingered between them, the kiss that had begun everything. "I want to understand," James said, his voice low. "Everything." Zara turned to him, her smile softer now. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture of reassurance, though it felt oddly intimate. "Understanding takes patience, human," she said. "But perhaps, with time, you will come. To see the world as we do?" James wanted to ask more, to probe deeper into her words, but something held him back. Was she referring to the kiss? Was it possible that there was more to their connection than he was willing to admit? Before he could gather his thoughts, a sudden burst of light from the distant starfields caught his eye. It was followed by a low hum, a vibration that ran through the station. James felt it, but it seemed that Zara didn't react. "We have to go," Zara said suddenly, her voice turning cold and urgent. "There's something you need to see." She walked swiftly toward the station's control room, leaving James with a sense of unease building inside him. Something was changing. Something was happening, and this time he wasn't sure it was just a cultural misunderstanding. The calm days on Zalora quickly became distant memories for James as the mission took an unexpected turn. What had started as a simple delivery to a peaceful space station was now morphing into something far more complicated. The deeper James ventured into the unknown, the more he felt like he was stepping into a world he was never meant to understand. Zara had become both a mystery and a guide, her presence in his life, both calming and unnerving. Yet, despite the connection they had begun to form, there were moments when James couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, something he couldn't put his finger on. The station had been quiet, isolated, but as they continued their journey to deliver essential supplies to a nearby colony, strange things began to happen. Disturbing signals came through the communication channels, distorted voices, warnings in languages James couldn't understand. There were mentions of a shadowy enemy, one that had lurked in the galaxy for centuries, waiting for the right time to strike. Zara was the first to notice the change. Her once serene and composed demeanor began to crack, though she tried to keep it hidden behind her calm exterior. James had observed the flicker of worry in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, the tension in her movements when she adjusted the ship's controls. For the first time since meeting her, Zara appeared vulnerable. That afternoon, Zara called James to the bridge. The usual quiet hum of the station had been replaced with a constant, unsettling buzz. The starfield outside the window seemed to shimmer in a way that made James feel like the universe was closing in on them. "James, we've detected something unusual," Zara said, her voice steady but tight with concern. "There's a ship now, a fleet moving in on our location. Is it a friendly fleet?" James asked, already sensing the gravity of the situation. "Not exactly," Zara replied, turning to him with a grave expression. "This fleet is ... ancient. It belongs to a long-forgotten enemy of my people, the Drather. They were once part of our galaxy, but they disappeared over 1,000 years ago. Now, it seems they've returned." James' heart raced. "What do we do?" Zara's eyes locked onto his, her voice taking on a more urgent tone. "We need to be ready. The Drather are powerful, ruthless. They do not care about treaties or peace. They come only to conquer and destroy." As the words left her mouth, the station shuddered. James could feel the tremor in the metal beneath his feet. The lights flickered, and the hum of the ship grew, louder, almost like a warning. Zara quickly moved to the station's controls, her hands flying over the buttons, her face tense with concentration. "This is bad, James," she murmured. "They're closer than I thought. We need to prepare for a possible attack." James couldn't believe what he was hearing. The peaceful space station he had arrived at was now a target, and the danger felt all too real. His mission, so simple just days ago, had turned into a matter of survival. Zara's next words were colder, more calculated. This isn't just about supplies anymore. It's about protecting everything: our lives, our culture, our very existence. James watched as she worked, her movements swift and precise. Despite her calm, there was an underlying tension that made her seem almost alien. This was no longer the same ambassador who had greeted him with warmth and curiosity. This was a warrior, a leader prepared for a battle unlike anything he had ever witnessed. "We have a plan," Zara said suddenly, turning to him with a hard edge in her voice. "But it's risky. You're not ready for this. You need to step back. I won't allow anyone to jeopardize the mission." James nodded, though his stomach churned. He had no choice now. The mission was no longer just about delivery yet. It was about survival. And if he was going to survive, he had to trust Zara, no matter how strange or terrifying the situation had become. He followed Zara down the narrow, glowing hallways of the station, moving quickly as the alarm systems began to sound. The walls were lined with alien technology that hummed with energy, each step bringing them closer to the ship's war room. James had never seen Zara so focused, determined. She was leading them into a battle, and everything in James told him that this was no ordinary fight. When they entered the war room, the holographic screens were already alive with data. Zara gestured for James to sit as she accessed the system. The room was filled with tactical information about the Drather fleet, its size, weaponry, and the sheer scale of the threat they posed. "The Drathor are an ancient race," Zora explained, her voice tight. "They are masters of war, and they don't take prisoners. We're going to have to outsmart them if we want any chance of surviving." James stared at the holograms, his heart hammering in his chest. "How do we do that?" Zara turned to him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, an intensity, a desperation. "We can't fight them, Hedden, but we can confuse them. We can create an illusion, a trap. If we can make them believe we're a much larger force than we are, we might have a chance." James didn't fully understand the plan, but he didn't have to. He trusted Zara. He had to. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, determination filling his voice. Zara's eyes softened for just a moment before she nodded. "Good, let's make sure they never see us coming." The battle was coming, and James was about to learn that the galaxy was far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The days on Zalora had felt like an eternity since the fleet's sudden arrival. James couldn't shake the weight of the unknown hanging over them. What had once seemed like an ordinary mission had now spiraled into a struggle for survival against an ancient enemy. Every step he took felt heavier, the tension rising like a storm cloud about to burst. Zara had remained a steadfast leader throughout it all, orchestrating their every move with a cool efficiency that James could only admire. But he could feel the cracks beginning to show, the flicker of vulnerability that crept into her actions when she thought no one was watching. She had always been strong, always in control. But now, even she seemed to be grappling with something bigger than herself. One evening, as James walked through the station's quiet halls, he found himself at the observation deck. The stars outside shimmered, vast and endless, like an ocean of light stretching into infinity. He had been here before, but tonight it felt different. The peaceful beauty of space now felt suffocating. He couldn't stop thinking about the Drather fleet, the approaching storm. And then there was Zara with her strange alien ways. Her culture, her people, her customs, it was all so far beyond his understanding. "James," a voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Zara standing just a few feet away, her silver eyes watching him intently. She didn't need to say anything more. He knew she had been searching for him. Her gaze held something new, a quiet intensity that hadn't been there before. "You've been distant," Zara said, her voice soft, but with an underlying weight. "I can feel it." James nodded, his throat tight. It's hard to keep focus when we're facing a fleet of enemies we don't understand, and I can't stop thinking about what happened between us. Zara's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She stepped closer, the soft hum of the station filling the silence between them. Her presence seemed to fill the space like she was everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a feeling that unsettled him, made him feel both drawn to her and afraid. Of what he couldn't fully comprehend about the kiss, she asked, her tone gentle, though there was a faint trace of something more, something deeper. You're confused by it, aren't you? James swallowed hard. He hadn't meant to bring it up again, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. I don't understand it. You kissed me like it was nothing, but it felt like something more. Something I'm not ready for. I don't know what to make of it. Zara studied him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then, without a word, she reached out and placed her hand on his arm, her touch sending a strange shiver through him. She was so close now, her presence almost overwhelming. The kiss was not what you think it was, James, Zara said, her voice low. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just an alien greeting. It was a bond, a connection, a way of sharing something deep between us, something that goes beyond language, beyond culture. James frowned, confused. A bond? Zara nodded, her fingers brushing against his skin. Yes, in my species, the kiss is a way of sharing not just physical space, but mental and emotional space. We connect with each other's thoughts, feelings, and histories. It's a gesture of trust, a way to see into someone's soul. James stood still, processing her words. So ... it wasn't just a greeting? You meant for me to feel it? Zara's eyes softened as she stepped back slightly, allowing him space. I did, but it wasn't meant to overwhelm you. I didn't want you to feel pressured, James. I wanted you to understand that in my culture, this connection is a sign of respect, of closeness. It's a way to show that I trust you, that I see you as more than just a human. James felt a cold rush of realization sweep over him. The kiss had been a moment of vulnerability, of openness. It wasn't just a casual greeting. It was something deeper, something Zara had chosen to share with him. And it was something that, in his confusion, he hadn't fully understood until now. I didn't know, he whispered, almost to himself. I didn't know how to react, but it felt ... real, like we were connected somehow, even though I didn't know what was happening. Zara nodded again, her expression thoughtful. That's the purpose, James. The connection is meant to be felt, not analyzed. It's not something you can fully comprehend with just your mind. It's something you feel with your heart. And, for my people, it's the first step in building a bond that transcends species. James stared at her, trying to absorb everything she was saying. He had come to Zalora with so many questions, but now he was starting to realize that the answers were far more complicated than he had imagined. Zora wasn't just a guide, and Ambassador Shea was someone who had shared something with him that he could never have prepared for. I don't know what to do with all of this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I can't stop feeling like I'm on the edge of something huge, something I don't fully understand. Zara smiled, her gaze softening. You don't need to understand everything, James. Sometimes the best things in life aren't understood, they're experienced. And in that moment, standing there in the quiet, star-filled expanse of space, James realized that this journey wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about the mission. It was about something far deeper, something that would change both him and Zara forever. The kiss had revealed something he wasn't ready for. But maybe, just maybe, he was ready to embrace it. He looked at Zara, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. So what happens now? Zara's eyes glinted with something. Knew something that hinted at more than just the mission. Now, we fight. But we fight together. And whatever happens, James, we will face it as equals. And for the first time, James wasn't just a human explorer. He was part of something much bigger, something that reached across the stars. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. The days after their conversation weighed heavily on James. The truth of what Zara had shared, their alien way of greeting. The emotional bond she had opened between them settled deeply within him. It wasn't something he had expected, not something he could have ever anticipated when he first boarded the Starwind on that quiet morning. But now, standing on the edge of something far greater than he had imagined, James felt the stirrings of something he wasn't sure how to navigate. His thoughts would often drift back to that kiss, to the feeling of Zara's presence wrapped around him like an invisible force. He had thought it was just a strange greeting, but it was far more than that. It had connected them in a level he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. Zara was different now, too. The strength she had always carried, the calm and composed exterior that she so carefully maintained, seemed to waver in moments when she thought no one was looking. Her eyes, once filled with a quiet confidence, now showed something deeper, something vulnerable. And it frightened James, not because he feared it, but because it made him realize how much more there was to lose. It wasn't just the mission. Anymore? The impending war with the Drather? The unknown dangers lurking in every shadow? It all felt like a distant hum compared to the conflict raging inside James' heart. How had he gone from being a simple explorer to someone caught between two worlds, trying to understand feelings he had never been prepared for? That evening, they gathered in the war room again, this time to strategize against the Drather fleet. That was closing in on them. The situation was dire. Zara's people had prepared for battle, but the Drather were relentless, their technology far more advanced than anything the Zelleran people had at their disposal. Zara was at the table, her holographic screens filled with tactical data, but her mind seemed somewhere else. James could see it, the slight tension in her posture, the way her eyes flickered back to him when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something unspoken between them now, something more than just allies. It was a bond forged under the strangest of circumstances, a kiss that had transcended the meaning of a simple gesture. "We can't defeat them head-on," Zara's voice broke through his thoughts, low and sharp, as she examined the data. "But we can outsmart them. We'll need to use every trick in the book to make them believe we're more than we are." James nodded, his thoughts still clouded by what had happened between them. His mind wandered to the uncertainty he felt. The overwhelming surge of emotions that had crept up on him wasn't just about surviving this battle. It was about something more profound, something he couldn't define. Every glance, every touch, every moment with Zara had become something so charged that it felt like it was pulling him in directions he wasn't ready to go. As they strategized, James felt a momentary disconnect. He had always been a man of reason, of logic. He had joined this mission for the thrill of discovery, not for the complexities of emotional entanglements. And yet here he was, deeply entangled in a situation he couldn't quite escape. After the meeting, as the crew went about their tasks, James found himself walking the halls of the station again, lost in his thoughts. The lights above flickered softly, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The steady hum of the station had always been a comfort, a reminder of safety and home. But now it felt oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in on him. He turned a corner, and there she was. Zara stood before him, her silhouette bathed in the soft blue glow of the corridor lights. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him silently, her silver eyes searching his face. "I didn't expect this," James said, his voice sounding strangely hollow in the quiet space. "Any of it." Zara stepped closer, her movements graceful, almost fluid. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone spoke volumes. It was as though they were the only two people in the galaxy. All the noise, all the danger, faded away in the silence between them. "I know, Zara," replied softly. "Neither did I." She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture that was both tender and filled with an undeniable weight. Her touch sent a shock through James, the same one he had felt when their lips had first met. But this time, it was different. This time, there was a quiet understanding in her eyes, an unspoken promise that made James' heart beat just a little faster. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." "Zara," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "All I know is that I can't stop thinking about you." "About..." Zara's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. But there was something sad about it, as if she had known all along how this would unfold. "Feelings are complicated, James, especially when they go beyond what we've been taught to expect. Sometimes we have to accept that some things don't need to be understood, they just need to be felt." Her words hung in the air, a truth James wasn't ready to hear but couldn't deny. His feelings for her were complicated, confusing, overwhelming, but they were real. And as much as he wanted to retreat from them, to ignore the storm building inside him, he couldn't. There was no going back now. Zara stepped back, her eyes holding his for a moment longer before she turned to leave. The battle is coming. James, she said, her tone low and steady. We'll have to face it together. But know this. Whatever happens, we'll always be more than just allies. And with that, she walked away, leaving James standing in the corridor. His heart a tangled mess of emotions and uncertainties. The war was coming. The Drather were closing in. But James realized in that moment that his greatest battle wasn't going to be on the front lines of a war. It was going to be the fight for his heart, his future with Zara. He didn't know how this story would end. For the first time since he'd boarded the Starwind, he felt like he was finally starting to understand where he was supposed to be. The days had bled into each other, the constant hum of the station, now a dull backdrop to the chaos swirling around James. The Drather fleet was mere hours away, and their relentless pursuit had left the crew of the Starwind on edge. Yet amidst the brewing storm of war, there was a quiet, undeniable shift happening inside James's shift he couldn't ignore. The emotional complexity of his bond with Zara had become inescapable, and now, in the midst of impending destruction, he was facing a choice that would define everything. Zara had been distant in the past few days, her focus entirely on the mission. James had seen her take command with a cold precision, a leader who didn't have time for doubts or distractions. But in the quiet moments, when their eyes met in passing, James saw something else, a flicker of the vulnerability she had shown him before. It's a silent understanding that passed between them. They had talked little about their growing connection, but it was there like an undercurrent pulling at them both. In every glance, in every touch, there was a promise that neither of them could quite vocalize. But now, the weight of that bond was more than either could bear. James stood in the war room, studying the holographic maps of the Drather fleet. The display showed a fleet so large it dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. Thousands of warships, each one brimming with destructive power. The numbers didn't lie. They were outmatched, outgunned. And yet Zara was still moving forward. With a plan that on paper had no chance of success. It was bold. It was risky. It was their only hope. "We don't have the luxury of time," Zara said, her voice firm as she adjusted the coordinates on the map. "We're going to use their overconfidence against them. They won't expect us to fight back, but we have a few tricks left." James nodded, though his mind wasn't on the strategy. He was still grappling with his own internal conflict, the one that had become clearer with every passing hour. His feelings for Zara had grown, deepened, and now the decision before him wasn't just about surviving this battle. It was about whether or not he was willing to stake everything, his mission, his loyalty, even his heart, on something he didn't fully understand. "Zara, if this fails, if we don't make it out of this alive," James began, his voice faltering for the first time. She turned to him, her silver eyes sharp but filled with an emotion he couldn't read. "Don't say it, James. We will make it through this. But you have to trust me. Trust in the plan." Her words were confident, but James could see the quiet fear behind them, the fear that she had never shown before. For all her strength, Zara was as afraid as he was. The weight of her people's survival rested on her shoulders, and she was carrying that burden alone. And then, as if reading his thoughts, Zara stepped closer to him, her gaze locking with his. There was no more pretense between them, no more masks of diplomacy or duty. In that moment, she was simply Zara, the woman who had shared her culture, her fears, her very soul with him. "You have to decide, James," she said softly, her voice low. "Are you willing to fight for this? For us?" The question hung in the air between them, heavier than any battle plan, more demanding than any strategy. In that moment, it wasn't about the Drather fleet or the mission anymore. It was about the choice James had to make, the decision that would define not just his role in the war, but his place in the galaxy, in Zara's world. Was he willing to risk everything to protect what they had, whatever it was, or was he going to walk away, to stay safe and detached from a bond he couldn't quite understand? James felt the pull in his chest, a magnetic force that seemed to draw him to Zara. He thought of the kiss, of the connection that had begun with something as simple as a greeting. He thought of the way she had guided him through the unknown, the way her strength had made him feel less alone in a universe that had once seemed infinite and isolating. He thought of the war, the Drather, and the many lives at stake. But most of all, he thought of her. "I don't know what the future holds, Zara," James whispered, his voice barely audible. "But I know this: whatever happens, I won't leave you. Not now, not ever." Zara's eyes softened, and for a brief moment the hardened warrior disappeared. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his cheek in a gesture that was gentle, almost intimate. "Then together we will face whatever comes. We will fight this battle, James, and we will win. Not because we have the odds in our favor, but because we have each other." With those words, James knew his decision had been made. The battle was no longer just about defeating the Drath. It was about fighting for something deeper, something he couldn't name but couldn't deny. He was in this fully. He was in it for Zara, for them, for the connection that had become the most important thing in his life. As the final preparations were made, the war room became a blur of motion. James and Zara stood side by side, a unified front against the darkness that approached. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the bond they had created, a bond stronger than any enemy they could face. As the first shots rang out across the stars, James knew that this was only the beginning. The Drather fleet may have been powerful, but they were facing something far stronger, an alliance forged in the most unlikely of places. And no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The choice had been made, and now the fight for their future had begun. Asterisk. The battle had been raging for hours. The once serene corridors of the Starwind were now filled with the shrill sounds of alarms, crackling of coms, and the pounding of footsteps as the crew scrambled to respond to the Drather's relentless assault. The station had become a battlefield, and James had never felt so alive and so terrified at the same time. Zara was at the helm, a warrior poised at the center of the storm. Her composure, once a shield against the chaos, had now become a symbol of unwavering resolve. But beneath the calm, James could see the weight of the battle bearing down on her. The glimmer of doubt she had tried so hard to keep hidden. She was as vulnerable as he was, but neither of them had the luxury of acknowledging it. There was no time for fear, no time for second-dash guessing. James stood beside her in the war room, watching the holographic battlefield unfold. The Drather fleet had been surprisingly evasive, their ships darting through the stars with agility that no one had anticipated. Despite their advanced technology, they were still vulnerable, still able to be outmaneuvered if they could anticipate their next move. "We've got one shot at this," Zara said, her voice low but firm, her eyes never leaving the screen. "If we misstep now, we won't get another chance." James nodded, his mind racing. This wasn't just a battle of weapons and strategy. It was a battle of wills, of minds. The Drather were not just enemies, they were a shadow from the past, a race that Zara's people had once feared. Here they were, on the verge of wiping out the remnants of that history. But Zara wasn't going to let that happen. "Not without a fight, Zara," James said, his voice breaking through the tension in the room. "If we fail..." Zara turned to him, her silver eyes darkened with the weight of the impending conflict. "Then we die trying," she said simply. But there was no bitterness in her voice, no fear, only a fierce, burning determination that resonated deep within James. "But we will not fail, James. I promise you." And in that moment, everything became clear. The universe, the war, their connection, it was all leading to this singular moment. This fight wasn't just about defeating the Drather. It was about proving that what they had shared, what they had built, was stronger than anything the universe could throw at them, stronger than the distance between their worlds, stronger than any enemy that came their way. James reached out, his hand brushing hers, his fingers briefly resting against her palm. She glanced at him, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them, before turning back to the tactical display. But the connection was there, unbreakable. Like a thread tying them together, even in the chaos of war. Then the ship shuddered. A blast from the Drathar fleet had shaken the Starwind, sending the whole station into a violent spin. The sound of sirens blared in the distance as crew members scrambled for cover. But Zara and James stood firm, their eyes locked on the battle unfolding before them. There was no turning back now. "Deploy the decoy," Zara commanded, her voice now cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Activate the shield generators and prepare the secondary weapons. We need to make them believe we have more firepower than we actually do. This is our only chance." James could feel the sweat on his brow, the pulse of adrenaline racing through his veins. Everything had led to this moment, this decision, this choice. Zara had trusted him with more than just the mission. She had trusted him with her heart, her people's survival, and now it was up to him to prove that trust wasn't misplaced. "We're ready," James said, his voice steady, though his heart was beating louder than the engines. "Let's make it count." With a fierce nod from Zara, the station's weapon systems activated. The decoy ship was launched, a holographic illusion that would send the Drather fleet on a wild goose chase, buying them the precious seconds they needed to strike back. Zara's fingers danced over the controls, manipulating the ship's systems with a precision only she possessed. The energy around them crackled with intensity, the air alive with anticipation. For a moment, everything seemed to stop: the flickering lights, the low hum of the engines, even the sounds of the battle outside. It was as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final moment. Then, with a deep breath, Zara hit the command to launch the full assault. The Starwind surged forward, its weapons firing in a coordinated blast that struck the heart of the Drather fleet. The decoy had done its job, confusing the enemy long enough to expose a weakness. The Drather were caught off guard, their ships now scrambling to adjust to the sudden onslaught. And then it happened. The explosion shook the station, a blinding flash of light that illuminated the entire battlefield. The Drather fleet faltered, and for the first time, it seemed as though victory was within their reach. But as the dust cleared, James' heart sank. One of the Drather warships had retaliated, its cannons aimed directly at the Starwind. Time slowed. Didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved with lightning speed, overriding the station's defensive systems, rerouting the energy to the remaining shields. It wasn't enough to fully stop the incoming blast, but it was enough to soften the impact. The ship groaned in protest, its systems faltering under the strain, but the shields held just barely. They had won, but at a cost. The ship lurched as the final blast hit, and everything went dark. When James regained consciousness, he was on the floor of the war room, his body aching from the impact. His vision swam, but as his eyes cleared, he saw Zara standing. Above him, her hand outstretched. Her face was cut, her clothes torn, but her expression was one of fierce triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. James took her hand, pulling himself to his feet. The battle was over, the Drather fleet scattered, their forces broken. But as he looked into Zara's eyes, he realized that the true victory wasn't just in the destruction of their enemies, it was in the bond they had forged, in the connection that had carried them through the darkest moments. Together, they had survived. Together, they had fought not just for their lives, but for each other. And as the stars outside the Starwind slowly returned to their steady rhythmic glow, James knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as one unbreakable, unstoppable, forever intertwined in the vastness of the universe.